Welcome once again to the Brownstone, Wolfe's sanctuary of logic, orchids, and murder. Do tell us where in the world you're listening from, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts. If you enjoy these cases, consider liking and subscribing. Now then, shall we begin? Nero Wolfe and the murder in Archie's apartment. The noise came at 2:30 on the dot, a sound that didn't belong to the civilized plumbing of my apartment. It wasn't a pipe groan or radiator protest. It was a thud with weight behind it, the kind that means either a body or a bad idea has landed too close to home. I was half asleep on the couch in my undershirt, a copy of Life dangling from one hand, and an empty ginger ale bottle on the table, when it came again, one dull scrape, then silence. I got up, barefoot, and crossed the room. The hall outside was dim except for the tired wall bulb near the stairs. I opened the door a crack and saw a man sitting against the opposite wall, head bent like he was studying the floor. That might have been fine if the back of his skull hadn't been missing a polite circle the size of a dime. The air smelled of gun oil and lilacs, a combination I don't recommend. I stood there long enough to make sure he wasn't planning to get up, then crouched to take inventory. He was well dressed, grey tweed, silk tie, shoes buffed to the sort of shine that cost $2 and a compliment. His hat had rolled a few feet down the hall. The bullet had entered neatly under the left ear, the kind of marksmanship that comes from either affection or practice. I didn't know the man, but my curiosity isn't the type that waits for daylight. I checked his inside pocket, found a leather billfold with cards and a crisp calling card. Leland Vance, publisher. That sounded respectable enough to be suspicious. In another pocket I found a folded page, torn down one edge covered in type. The title line read The Orchid Kiss. The typing was neat, but the edge was ragged where it had been torn from a larger stack. If I'd known corpses were dropping by unannounced, I'd have left out milk and cookies. I went back into my place, dialed homicide, and gave them the news. The desk sergeant said to stay put and keep the hallway clear. That was easy. My neighbours were either asleep or pretending to be. I gave the man's shoulder a gentle nudge with the edge of my shoe, strictly to confirm physics, not friendship, then leaned in the doorway waiting for company. The company arrived fast enough to prove the precinct was awake. 2 uniforms and a detective I didn't know came up the stairs first. They had the kind of efficiency that comes from doing it too often. Chalk, notes, flashlights, questions. I gave them the short version and waited for the sound of a cigar. Sure enough, Inspector Kramer came puffing up 10 minutes later, his overcoat half-buttoned and his cigar chewed to a stump. His eyes took in the body, then me, then the torn page I was holding in a handkerchief. "Goodwin," he said, as if the name had just turned up on a warrant. "You couldn't find a quieter way to get headlines?" "Not tonight," I told him. He brought the noise himself. Kramer grunted, crouched by the body and examined the hole. "One shot. Close range. You didn't hear anything?" "Only the landing." "You touch anything?" "Only the door, the phone, and my temper." He didn't believe that, but he knew better than to argue at 2:30 in the morning. He motioned to the detective with him. "Get the lab boys up here and find out who else lives on this floor." When the uniforms went about their business, Kramer straightened up and glared at me through cigar smoke. "What's that you've got?" "Paper. A fragment." I held it out, still in the handkerchief. "Came from his pocket. Title says The Orchid Kiss." "Don't hand me riddles. What's that supposed to be?" "Looks like a manuscript page. Maybe something he was publishing." He scowled and took it carefully. His thumb traced the tear. "Why'd you look in his pockets?" "I like to know who's dying on my doorstep. Keeps my social calendar straight." "That's evidence, Goodwin." "So's the smell of lilacs. You planning to bag the air too?" He muttered something that didn't sound like a compliment. "Leland Vance," he said slowly. "I've heard that name. Fancy pants publisher. Vanity press racket." He gave me a narrow look. "You ever work for him?" "Nope. My reading taste runs to checks that clear." Kramer exhaled smoke, the kind that means frustration with a side order of duty. "All right, I'll bite. How'd a publisher end up here at this hour?" "That's your department, Inspector." "Phooey," he grumbled, though that word was usually Wolfe's. "I'll tell you one thing. Keep Wolfe out of this. I've had enough of his couch-bound theatrics." I gave him my most innocent smile. "You think I control him? Try telling that to the orchids." "I mean it, Goodwin. He sticks his nose in. I'll get a warrant for obstruction." "That's fair," I said cheerfully. "You tell him that yourself." Kramer's eyes narrowed. He already know? Not yet, but I can't promise his psychic abilities won't kick in once the newspapers hit the stand. He groaned and signaled his men to move the body. All right, wise guy, stay available. I always am, I told him, which wasn't true but sounded polite. By the time they rolled Vance out on a stretcher, the hallway smelled like disinfectant and smoke. I went back inside, poured myself a small glass of milk, yes, the stuff Wolfe disapproves of, and sat down at the table with the phone. At that hour, Wolfe would be asleep, but there are emergencies and then there are entertainments. I decided this counted as both. I dialed the brownstone. Fritz answered, because Fritz always answers after the third ring. Goodwin residence, he said. It's me. Sorry to break up your dreams of soufflé. Is Wolfe vertical? 1 moment. A pause, then the deep rumble came on the line. Archie, do you know what hour it is? I do, sir. It's 2:51 and I have a body in my hallway. Male, 40-ish, publisher by trade. Goes by Leland Vance. Thought you'd want the exclusive. I could almost hear his frown through the receiver. A body. In your hallway. Yes, sir. You have informed the police? Of course. Kramer's been and gone. He sends his love and a mild threat. There was a sigh that could have toppled a lesser man's patience. Archie, you meddled. Only conversationally. I checked his pockets for ID before they arrived, found a manuscript page titled The Orchid Kiss. Silence. Then Wolfe's tone sharpened. Repeat that. The Orchid Kiss. Another pause, longer this time. A foolish title. What else? Calling card from his company, that's it. And the police took them? The page, yes. Phooey. The exhalation came like the lid of a kettle. You should not have touched it. You know better. Yes, sir, but if I hadn't, you'd have spent tomorrow morning wondering why you weren't told first. He grunted, Wolfe's version of reluctant approval. Described the condition. Bullet wound under the left ear. Smelled like lilacs. Another silence. When Wolfe speaks less, he's thinking more. Lilacs, he repeated slowly. A curious association. Could have been cologne. Or not. I waited, but the line stayed quiet. Anything else you want, sir? Yes, he said finally. Bring me the manuscript piece. Kramer took it. Then retrieve a copy. However you must. I wish to see it. I smiled into the receiver. You're interested? I am irritated, he said curtly. A man dies near you. A manuscript bears an absurdly botanical title, and the odour of lilacs, reminiscent of a certain hybrid in my own rooms, is noted. I would be a fool not to inquire. Kramer told me to keep you out of it. Then he is consistent, Wolfe said dryly. You will come at 11. Bring breakfast. Also, I have asked Mr. Pantzer to make discreet inquiries. He will observe, not intrude. I heard Saul's calm assent click in on the second line before Fritz transferred the call. If Vance had left a trail between midnight and 2, Saul would put pins in it before breakfast. Yes, sir. I'll bring the morning papers too. Maybe they'll make us both famous. Archie. His tone had that edge I know well, the one that means he's concerned but too dignified to say it straight. Do not engage in heroics tonight, I grinned. I'll try to restrict myself to beauty sleep. He hung up without farewell, which for Wolfe is practically affection. I sat for a while, looking at the empty hallway through the open door. The floor still showed the faint scuff where the man had fallen. There was a scrap of lint near the wall that caught the light. Nothing important, probably from his coat. I let it lie. The air still held a whisper of lilac that didn't belong anywhere near my address. At 3:30, the street below was quiet again. A cab passed, tyres whispering on asphalt. The city had gone back to pretending it didn't know about me or Leland Vance or the Orchid Kiss. I closed the door, locked it twice, and went to bed. Sleep didn't stick. Somewhere between dreams and dawn I could still hear Wolfe's voice, calm, precise, and already dissecting the puzzle. And I knew by breakfast we'd both be knee-deep in the kind of mess that starts with orchids and ends with headlines. Morning at the brownstone had the peaceful dignity of a monastery that had just read bad news in the paper. Fritz was padding about in his soft shoes, the aroma of coffee and buttered croissants staging a moral assault on my restraint. Wolfe sat in the yellow chair in his robe, a napkin draped over his front like a flag of mild surrender. He was glaring at the breakfast tray as though Fritz had personally invented indigestion. I'd been up since dawn writing my statement for homicide, so when I came in, still carrying the faint perfume of disinfectant and police suspicion, I figured I deserved my own plate. Fritz took pity and produced it. Wolfe gave me a look that weighed the sins of mankind and found mine most recent. "Archie," he said finally, "your domestic arrangements have become intolerable. Must corpses now appear as nocturnal ornaments to your threshold?" "They're branching out," I said, buttering a roll. "Next week I expect one will fall down the dumbwaiter." "Pfui." He lifted his cup and sipped. "A corpse is an intrusion. Worse, an affront to order. And this one in particular, in your building, invites police contamination of my morning." I took that as permission to brief him. He listened, his eyes half closed, like a man being read dull poetry. When I reached the part about the lilac scent, his eyelids snapped open. "Lilacs?" "Yes, a faint trace. You know me. I wouldn't mistake that for cologne." He frowned, heavy and precise. "It is not a common note. Theodore cultivates a single hybrid with that aroma. No specimen has left this house." "Maybe your orchids have started freelancing," I offered. He ignored it. "And the manuscript page?" Kramer's boys bagged it. Title, "The Orchid Kiss." A single brow arched, deliberate as sunrise. "That title, sir, carries a distinct aroma as well, of idiocy." "You and Kramer should form a chorus," I said. He didn't like it either. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. "The Orchid Kiss. I recall it. A manuscript submitted 2 months ago to Eclipse Books. Their editor, Miss Julia Kenton, rejected it publicly, an indiscretion in itself. She called it pretentious botanical nonsense." I made a note on my pad. "So, our dead publisher took a manuscript no one wanted and gave it a title you despise. We're rich in motives already." He glared. "You are pandering to melodrama." "Only part-time." The bell rang at 10:20. Fritz appeared with the poise of a man delivering a bomb he didn't design. "Inspector Kramer," he said. "Of course," Wolfe muttered. "Send him in." Kramer entered without waiting for the invitation to finish echoing. His cigar was already burning, his hat shoved back, and his mood advertised itself like a headline. He gave the room one sweep and stopped at me. "You again. I just had breakfast spoiled reading your statement." "Good to know I'm still in print," I said. He grunted and turned to Wolfe. "The stiff in Goodwin's hallway was Leland Vance, publisher. Maybe you knew him." "I did not," Wolfe said. His tone could have frozen soup. Kramer didn't blink. "He ran a small outfit on East 48th. Vanity stuff. Charged people to print their own brilliance. He had enemies, sure, but none of them shot him in their pajamas. You sure you never met him?" "Inspector," Wolfe said patiently, "I seldom meet anyone. It preserves my health." Yeah, orchids, meals, the full routine. Listen, what do you know about something called the Orchid Kiss?" "The title," Wolfe said, "is familiar. The substance I have not endured. It was submitted elsewhere and declined. Miss Kenton's rejection was, I believe, vociferous." Kramer made a note in his pocketbook. "Julia Kenton, Eclipse Books. We'll look into her. You think Vance stole it?" "I think," Wolfe said coolly, "he printed it. Whether by theft or arrangement remains to be seen." I added, "He was carrying only one page when he arrived at my door, dead on delivery." Kramer's eyes shifted to me hard. "You sure it was him who came? You didn't hear a shot?" "No, but I didn't order a corpse from room service either." That earned me the cigar wag. "You think this is funny, Goodwin?" "I'm trying to keep it from being monotonous." Kramer inhaled smoke like it was oxygen. "You checked his pockets. Why?" "Habit. Evidence." "He's still dead either way," I said. Wolfe's voice cut in, calm but sharp enough to shave. "Inspector, may I remind you my assistant has already submitted a full report. You're repeating yourself, which is dull for all concerned." Kramer's jaw flexed. "Look, Wolfe, I'm not here to trade grammar. I just want to know if you're mixed up in this." "I am not," Wolfe said, "though your presence tempts me. However, I am curious. The lilac scent Mr. Goodwin noted. Was it verified?" Kramer blinked. "Lilacs? No, we didn't note that." "Then note it now," Wolfe said. "You may find it worth the trouble." Kramer looked from one of us to the other, trying to decide which was the bigger headache. "All right, I'll bite. You think your flowers walk?" "Not yet," Wolfe murmured. I stepped in. "If you want my opinion—" "I don't," Kramer said automatically. "He was killed elsewhere and dumped at my door for a reason. Whoever did it wanted the page to be found by someone loud enough to make it public." Kramer eyed me. "Meaning you." "Exactly." He considered that. "You got fans I don't know about?" "Not since last tax season." Kramer puffed smoke toward the ceiling. "If I find out Wolfe's hiding something—" Wolfe cut him off with a raised finger. "Inspector, your conditional threats are tedious. I have no interest in your dead publisher unless he trespassed on my comfort, which he has already done through Mr. Goodwin. You may trust that I shall learn more efficiently than you will." That landed like a slap, but Kramer had been through the course before. He jammed his cigar back in his mouth and headed for the door. "All right, Wolfe, have it your way. I'll wait for your report, but if you're sitting on evidence, I'll sit on you." He left, the door clicking like punctuation on an argument. For a moment the office was still except for the ticking of the globe clock and the faint hum from the street. Wolfe sighed, leaned back and stared at the ceiling as if inspiration might be hiding in the plaster. "Archie," he said at last, "fetch the morning paper." I handed him the folded Gazette from my coat pocket. He scanned the front page, then the crime column. The item was small, halfway down. "Publisher slain in apartment hall. Police investigate motive." "Bah," he said. "Journalistic anemia." "Give them time," I said. "By lunch they'll have me in handcuffs and you in quotation marks." He set the paper aside. "You are rarely dull, Archie. Unfortunately." I grinned. "That's why you keep me." He closed his eyes, fingertips pressed together. "Possibly. Now leave me. I must think." I rose, gathered my notes and paused at the door. "Think fast. Kramer's already halfway to eclipse books." "Let him," Wolfe said, eyes still closed. "He will ask the wrong questions in the wrong order and report the wrong answers. That too is a comfort." At that moment, Fritz appeared silently with the silver tray, bearing the morning's second pot of coffee. He placed it down like a benediction. Wolfe grunted approval. The office settled again into the kind of peace that always means trouble's coming. If charm had a zip code, it would have been printed on Julia Kenton's stationery. I got there at 5:30, twilight flattening Park Avenue into gold and chrome, the kind of light that makes doormen feel like priests. Eclipse Books had its office on the 15th floor, a suite that smelled of printer's ink, perfume, and the kind of money that gets old gracefully. The reception girl had an expression that suggested no one ever got past her unless they could quote Keats or buy advertising. I gave her Wolfe's card and my smile, and she melted faster than butter in Fritz's skillet. "Miss Kenton will see you," she said, with the faint sigh of someone who'd just betrayed literature. Inside, Julia Kenton was behind a desk the size of a small yacht, wearing a mink that would have looked overdressed at the opera. Her hair was sleek black, her lipstick precise, and her confidence came in bold type. She didn't rise, she gestured. "Mr. Goodwin, the Nero Wolfe man." "That's right," I said, taking a chair that probably cost more than my first car. "I'm gathering material on Leland Vance. You knew him?" "Professionally," she said. "And unhappily. Vance was a parasite with a printing press. What's he done now?" "He's dead." Her pen froze above the blotter. For one beat her eyes went wide, then shuttered. "Dead?" "Shot," I said, "in my hallway." The pen rolled out of her fingers. "My God." You'd be surprised how often I hear that. She leaned back, adjusting the mink like armor. "Inspector Kramer called earlier. I told him the truth. Vance tried to blackmail me." "That's the word of the day," I said. "What about?" "A manuscript. Some dreadful novel called The Orchid Kiss. He said he'd publish it under a pseudonym and imply it was mine, unless I paid to stop him." "That's entrepreneurial," I said. "Why you?" "Because I rejected it. It was vulgar. Gossip-wearing orchids. He said I'd stolen it. Preposterous." I pulled out my notebook. "Who wrote it then?" "I don't know," she said too quickly. "Some hack. It came anonymously. We returned it weeks ago." There was a faint clatter behind her as a typist finished a page and slipped out. The room went quiet except for the hum of the city through open French windows. I glanced around. Everything gleamed. Steel lamp, crystal ashtray, and a Remington portable on a side desk. Its keys were neat except for one. The letter E leaned like it was drunk. "Nice machine," I said. She followed my gaze. "Company property, why?" I've seen that same limp E before. Her smile thinned. Do all detectives analyze typography? Only when it flirts with murder, I said. That got me a silence worth framing. Then she laughed softly, low and smooth. Mr. Goodwin, are you accusing me of writing The Orchid Kiss? I'm accusing your typewriter of having talent. She stood, came around the desk, and perched on its edge, close enough for her perfume to start an argument with my common sense. I edited thousands of pages. Maybe one of my assistants used it. You can't hang a homicide on a crooked key. No, but it's a start, I said. Her eyes met mine, dark and polished. Vance was vile, but I didn't kill him. I paid him. Paid him? A check for 1,000 to make him go away. He laughed and said he'd think about it. That was the last time I saw him. I whistled low. That kind of hush money could buy a lot of orchids. Spare me the symbolism. She crossed to the window, gazing out at the city. You think this is glamour, Mr. Goodwin? Editing men like Vance is like bathing in ink. It never washes off. I was beginning to enjoy her dramatics when the phone on her desk rang. She picked it up, said, Yes? No, tell him I'm not available, and hung up with a crisp click. Her colour had faded a shade. Who's avoiding you? I asked. No one of importance. Then why the pallor? I dislike interruptions, she said. Is that all, Mr. Goodwin? For now. I rose, slipped my notebook away. If I were you, I'd keep that typewriter locked up. It's making enemies. She followed me to the door. You're quite sure Wolfe sent you, not the police? Positive. If the police wanted charm, they'd send a subpoena. Her laugh followed me into the hall, elegant and brittle. Downstairs, I found a payphone beside the elevator bank and dialed the brownstone. Wolfe answered after Fritz's transfer. Well, he demanded. She's interesting, I said. Pretty, polished, and wearing gilt like perfume. She claims Vance tried blackmail over The Orchid Kiss, but denies authorship. Of course. There's a Remington in her office with an E that limps worse than Ori after a cheap date, same as the typing on the manuscript page. Silence hummed over the line, then Wolfe's voice. Excellent. Try not to let her stab you with her pen. That's reassuring, I said. Any further commands? Yes. Acquire a photostat of the page if Kramer permits. And Archie. His tone softened. Be circumspect. Miss Kenton's breed is dangerous. They write their lies before they speak them. I'll keep my copy short, I said. I hung up and took a slow look at the evening skyline. Park Avenue glittered below like a typewriter ribbon, black, silver, and punctuated with light. Somewhere behind one of those windows, someone was writing fiction that killed. I decided the next move could wait until evening. At 6 that same evening, I was standing in a room that smelled of wilted flowers, cheap cigars, and expensive phoniness. The Vance Publishing reception suite had been rearranged for the memorial, champagne on side tables, black crepe on the portraits, and a crowd of mourners who looked like they'd rather be proofing galleys. If envy were paper stock, that room could have published the Bible twice. The carpet muffled gossip, but not enough. Everyone was whispering, authors, editors, publicists, each convinced the dead man's shoes were about to be filled by someone they despised. I signed the guest book out of habit, because homicide etiquette is still etiquette, and scanned the field. Howard Sloane was easy to spot, Vance's partner, and the only man sweating through a silk collar in air conditioning. He had the harassed look of a man who knew the bank balance too well. I eased his way. Archie Goodwin, I said. I'm handling some follow-up for Nero Wolfe. He flinched. Wolfe? Oh, the detective. Vance mentioned him once. Something about orchids. Among other things, I said. Rough night for publishers. Sloane dabbed at his forehead. Rougher for authors. The vultures will circle. You can't imagine the calls I've had. Everyone asking who inherits the contracts. Some people send flowers, I said. Others send manuscripts. That got half a grin before the panic returned. Listen, Mr. Goodwin, you didn't hear this from me, but something's missing. From the office safe. I raised an eyebrow. Cash? Worse. A manuscript folder, notes of first chapter carbon and letters. Vance kept it separate, red leather, initials stamped LD. I noticed it gone yesterday, but assumed he'd moved it. Now, well, his eyes darted around. You won't quote me? Only in the privacy of Wolfe's brain, I said. What was in it? Don't know. He called it insurance. That word had a way of showing up before funerals. I left him chewing his lip and drifted toward the buffet, where champagne was being poured by an underpaid secretary in mourning gloves. Lorna Dale was there, hard to miss. Crimson dress, black veil, cigarette holder long enough to skewer a conscience. She wrote crime novels that sold faster than aspirin, and apparently lived them with similar results. She looked me over with open amusement. "You're not one of ours. You move too well." "I try not to trip over corpses," I said. Lorna Dale. "Guilty." She exhaled smoke through a smile. "And you're Nero Wolfe's Boy Scout." "Depends which troop you ask." She laughed low and practiced. "Leland's death is terrible, of course, but you'll forgive me if I don't wear black twice for the same man." That a confession or a literary metaphor? Both. Leland liked to play publisher and paramour simultaneously. I quit both jobs 6 months ago. I took a sip of the champagne. It tasted like regret with bubbles. He ever mention a manuscript called The Orchid Kiss? Her lashes lowered just a fraction too slowly. "No. Should I have read it?" "Maybe you wrote it." She gave a slow smile. "If I did, it would have been better edited." "Touché," I said. "One more question. Did he keep anything of yours in that office safe?" Her fingers tightened on the cigarette holder. "He promised to destroy certain letters. If you find them, burn them before Kramer does. He'd think passion was probable cause." "Inspector Kramer doesn't read love letters," I said. "He just files them under motive." She flicked ash and turned away. "Tell Wolfe that some stories are better unpublished." That was either a warning or a threat, and I couldn't tell which had better punctuation. I left her to her performance and crossed to the back corner, where a cluster of writers hovered around a punch bowl. The man at the centre looked like he'd been born in a trench coat. Thin, grey, eyes that dissected rather than looked. Bernard Paxton, the literary critic who made a living destroying other people's sentences. He spotted me before I got close. "Goodwin, isn't it? I've seen you in court once or twice, testifying, not charged." "That's progress," I said. "You knew Vance?" He snorted. "Everyone knew Vance. He published garbage for a price and called it taste. He ruined the word literature in 3 boroughs." "Strong feelings," I said. "Facts." He swirled his drink. "Do you know he threatened to publish a book of my reviews, without permission, said it would prove controversy sells. I told him it would prove libel sells faster." "Maybe The Orchid Kiss was in the same line of business." "The Orchid what?" "Never mind," I said. "Anything unusual the last time you saw him?" Paxton's gaze sharpened. "Yesterday morning. He looked like a man who'd found a tiger in his mailbox. Wouldn't say why. I assumed another scandal." "That assumption paying off?" "I'm not sure yet," he said. "But you can tell Wolfe from me that if there's justice, it's badly proofread." He turned away before I could ask more. I decided the champagne wasn't improving and set the glass down. The crowd had thickened, the room buzzed with speculative grief. On one wall, a portrait of Vance smiled down like a man who'd sold his last edition. At 6:30, I called Wolfe from the hall payphone. He answered on the first ring, which for him was enthusiasm. "Well?" he demanded. "I've attended your first and last wake vicariously," I said. The late Vance drew a lively crowd, his partners sweating over a missing red folder from the safe, initials L.D. Lorna Dale's initials, incidentally. His ex-mistress denies knowing The Orchid Kiss, which probably means she wrote it, and Bernard Paxton hates the deceased on general principle. "Bah, generalities are for soldiers," Wolfe said. "Specifics." "Folder gone yesterday, described as insurance. Lorna's worried about old letters. Paxton says Vance looked scared before he died." Wolfe was silent a moment. "A confluence of human vanity, avarice and fear, publishing distilled. Did you observe their reactions to the news of death?" Lorna performed it, Sloane perspired, Paxton gloated quietly. My vote's still open. "You took note of the surroundings. Every inch. I could draw you the wallpaper, though I'd rather not." "Good. Record the impressions. We dine at 8. Do not be late." "Wouldn't dream of it. You're having what? Rack of lamb or another autopsy?" He ignored that. "Archie, keep away from Miss Dale's eyes. They could be terminal." "Yes, sir," I said, though I wasn't sure he was wrong. I hung up and went back for one last lap. The crowd was thinning, replaced by newspaper men with camera flashes and questions sharp enough to bleed ink. I caught a fragment of conversation near the door. Sloane muttering to Lorna, If the police open that safe, before he noticed me and stopped, I smiled at him. Don't worry, I'm just a guest mourner. He didn't smile back. By the time I hit the street, night had settled and the neon of Midtown looked like typewriter keys lit from below. The case had begun to smell less like murder and more like an editorial conference. Too many egos, not enough truth. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in the office, ensconced behind the desk with his glass of beer. He didn't glance up when I entered. He just said, "Report." I gave it to him clean. No flourishes, no champagne. When I reached Sloane's confession about the missing folder, Wolfe's eyes flicked open. A manuscript stolen, a lover scorned, a critic affronted. He sipped slowly. The corpse grows almost respectable by comparison. Glad to hear it, I said. Any orders? None until tomorrow. I dine. That was dismissal. Fritz appeared with the tray, the silver covers gleaming. Wolfe inhaled, satisfied, and waved me toward the door. I left him to his lamb and logic, thinking that if publishing could kill reputations, it had just graduated to bodies. Dusk thickened over the brownstone as I came in. Same office, same lamp, a fresh sheet of trouble. Wolfe was in the office, chair back, fingers steepled, eyes half-lidded in that pose that made visitors wonder if he was asleep, in prayer, or plotting a small coup. I had just returned from police headquarters with a photostat of the orchid kiss fragment that Kramer had loaned me under loud protest. Getting it had required more diplomacy than the Geneva conference and twice as many cigars. I laid the page on Wolfe's desk with the care due a live grenade. There it is, boss, the late Mr. Vance's swan song. One page, several adjectives, and the promise of scandal. He reached for it as though reluctant to touch something unclean. The lamplight caught the thick paper, its edges frayed, the typing sharp except for that one limping E. I'd already read it. Twice. The piece was a satire of publishing life. Editors as parasites, critics as carrion, and a certain unnamed fat detective who solved crimes by bullying the innocent and misquoting Latin. Wolfe read silently. I watched the colour rise along his neck like a thermometer in August. His lips compressed, his nostrils flared once, and for a full minute the only sound was the tick of the wall clock and my own internal laughter trying to behave. At length he folded the paper once precisely and said in a voice that could have cracked marble, "Archie, read it aloud." I did, and if I put a little extra warmth into the corpulent sleuth whose orchids bloom more lovingly than his logic, well, I've never claimed sainthood. When I finished, Wolfe's silence had acquired voltage. His eyes were half-closed slits of molten amber. I leaned back in my chair. I always knew we'd end up in fiction, I said, but I hoped for a better title. "Remove that smirk," he said softly, "or I shall remove you." I wiped it off mostly. "Don't take it personally, sir. It's practically a tribute. You've made it. You're a literary archetype." Phooey. He dropped the paper onto the blotter. This drivel was written by an imbecile with access to my household. Observe. He tapped a line with one thick finger. The detective's study smelled of beer, orchids, and fear. Fear, Archie. Have you ever once feared me? Only when you threatened to dock my pay. Then the author is a liar as well as a dolt. Further, he jabbed the next paragraph. This passage describes the orchids accurately. Too accurately. The phrasing, rows of lilac throats opening to the sun. No visitor could have observed that without entering the plant rooms, and no one enters them but myself, Theodore, and occasionally you. Not lately, I said. Maybe Theodore's been moonlighting as a poet. He ignored that. Someone has betrayed my privacy, intimately. I raised an eyebrow. That's a pretty stiff word for a man who's allergic to visitors. Intimately, he repeated, and with malice. Before I could answer, the bell rang. Fritz appeared in the doorway, grave as an undertaker. "Inspector Kramer, sir." "Phooey," Wolfe muttered again. "At this hour?" I went to the door and waved Kramer in. He looked like he'd lost another wrestling match with the press. Coat unbuttoned, cigar bitten in half, hair going rogue. He had the photostats twin folded in his pocket. "Evening, Wolfe," he said. "Goodwin. You've got nerve-borrowing evidence before I've had time to file it." I returned it, I said. "You can count the wrinkles." Kramer scowled, dropped into a red chair and pulled out the page. "We've been comparing typing samples from Vance's office. No match. His secretary's clean and his machine's different. So, Wolfe, this thing turns up in Goodwin's hallway, describes you and stinks of your orchids. You want to tell me why?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "I heard you. You imply that my assistant fabricated this grotesquerie and murdered a publisher to advertise it. That, Inspector, is either a jest in deplorable taste or an imputation actionable in court." Kramer's cigar twitched. "Take it easy, I'm not charging him yet. But I can't ignore the coincidence. The piece mentions orchids and Goodwin's apartment turns into a morgue." Wolfe leaned forward, forearms on the desk, every inch of him suddenly alive with contemptuous precision. "Archie Goodwin has many vices. He is impulsive, insolent, and entirely too loquacious. But forgery and murder are not among them." That took me off guard. Kramer, too. For a second the room felt smaller, like the walls were listening. Kramer cleared his throat. All right. But you can't deny somebody close to you spilled ink they shouldn't. This page didn't write itself." "Obviously," Wolfe said. "The question is who, not how loud. You may exclude my household. Mr. Goodwin, though exasperating, is loyal. Fritz has neither time nor imagination. Theodore Horstman would sooner poison me than parody me, which is at least efficient. Therefore," he tapped the desk bell, summoning thought like thunder. "Therefore, Inspector, the author had access to information given verbally to an outsider. Some visitor heard more than he should, perhaps an interviewee, perhaps a gossip monger." Kramer puffed smoke toward the ceiling. "That narrows it down to half of Manhattan. You think this orchid kiss thing is connected to Vance's death?" "I'm certain of it," Wolfe said. "Vanity and revenge through art are ancient motives. Murder is merely the epilogue." "Then who wrote it?" "If I knew that," Wolfe said, "you would already be out of my chair." Kramer grunted, flicked ash into the tray, and eyed me. "You found the body, Goodwin. You ever meet Vance before?" "No, I don't keep publishers on retainer. They're too temperamental." "Then how the hell did he end up at your door?" "That's your puzzle, Inspector," I said. "Mine's figuring out who thinks I'm a character in bad fiction." Kramer sighed, rubbed his temple. "You both drive me crazy." "That," Wolfe said dryly, "is mutual." Kramer rose, stuffing the photostat away. "All right, Wolfe. You want to play philosopher? Go ahead. But if I find proof that Page came from inside this house, then you will bring it to me first," Wolfe interrupted smoothly. "Since if it did, I will identify the traitor before you can spell warrant." For a second, Kramer's face softened into something like reluctant respect. "All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report, but not long." When the door closed behind him, the office regained its air of disciplined silence. Wolfe leaned back, reached for his glass, and drank. "You realize," I said, "that's the first time you've defended me to Kramer without adding an insult." He waved a hand. "Do not overvalue the novelty. I require you alive and solvent." "That's touching. I might have it engraved." He glared at the folded paper on his blotter. "The author of this travesty will be found. To misuse my orchids, as metaphor is indecent, and to misuse my person, intolerable." "Suppose it's Vance's handiwork," I suggested. "He was a publisher after all. Maybe he liked revenge in print." "Impossible," Wolfe said. "He lacked intellect. His prose, if his advertisements are samples, was functional at best." "So we're looking for a writer with access to the house, an eye for orchids, and bad manners." "Precisely," he said. "You will compile a list tomorrow morning. For now, bed. I shall take an hour with Horace, who at least writes with grace." He reached for a volume from the shelf, the case closed, and Fritz appeared at the doorway again, silent as etiquette. "Beer, sir?" "Yes," Wolfe said, softening slightly. "A large one, and a smaller glass for Mr. Goodwin." That was his version of an apology, and I accepted it. As Fritz vanished to fetch the tray, I couldn't help grinning again. Wolfe looked up sharply. "Why are you smiling?" "Just thinking, sir. If we're characters now, I'd like an advance on royalties." He groaned, shut the book, and rang the bell again. Broadway looked half asleep under a drizzle of neon when I rang Lorna Dale's bell. The doorman had given me the kind of look usually reserved for repo men and literary agents, but he'd let me up after I promised not to autograph anything. Her building was the kind that smelled of velvet and disappointment. She opened the door wearing a housecoat the colour of fog and eyes that had seen too much press. The apartment behind her was tidy, tasteful, and nervous, a desk by the window with a typewriter ticking like a small, guilty heart. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice tuned somewhere between surprise and rehearsal. "I hoped it was the milkman. You're less nourishing." "I'm cheaper," I said, stepping in. "Mind if I look around while you decide whether to faint or fib?" She smiled faintly, the kind you use when you're choosing which story will sound best on the witness stand. "If this is about Leland Vance," "It is, and so is the homicide division. They know he came to see you before he turned up dead. So do I. The difference is, I'd like to hear it in English before Kramer translates it into handcuffs." Her mouth tightened. "You had him followed, didn't you? I might have known Nero Wolfe wouldn't leave the police alone with a puzzle." "You've got the picture," I said. "So, let's have the details. Vance came here?" She crossed to the window, hugging herself. "He did. He was persistent. I told him I was through with him, personally and professionally. But he said he had something of mine, something I'd pay to get back." "Letters?" I guessed. "Worse, a manuscript." I raised an eyebrow. "The orchid kiss?" She flinched. "So he told you?" "Not him," I said. "Your late publisher left breadcrumbs." Her hand trembled as she reached for a cigarette. I lit it for her. She missed twice before the flame steadied. "He said he'd give it back if I met him at your address," she said. "Your building. I thought it was a trick. But he sent me a note, said he'd leave it with you if I didn't come. I still had the spare key." "Spare key?" I echoed. "For research," she said quickly. "When I was writing Murder by Lease, I needed the floor plan of a bachelor's apartment. You let me in once. Remember?" "I remember you sketching my furniture like it owed you rent," I said. "You kept the key." "I meant to return it." She turned away again, her shoulders sharp under the robe. "When I got there, he was already gone. I waited an hour, then left, that's all." "Except for one thing," I said. "He was shot not long after that, right outside my door." The words hit her like a slap. She staggered, caught herself on the desk, then crumpled into the chair. The cigarette rolled from her fingers and died in the ashtray. Her eyes filled fast. "If tears were royalties," I muttered, "you'd be on the bestseller list." Please don't make jokes," she whispered. "He was a brute, but I didn't want him dead." I handed her a handkerchief. She took it and dabbed her eyes. That's when I saw it, a faint smear of pale lilac dust on her right glove. "New perfume?" I asked. She followed my gaze. "Oh, pollen, I suppose. I brushed against flowers in the lobby." "Must have been quite a garden." I leaned closer. "Mind if I borrow the glove?" Her chin lifted. "Is this police procedure?" "Private procedure," I said. "I'll get it back to you once I've run it through my expert. If it helps, he's house-trained and very fond of orchids." She hesitated, then peeled off the glove and handed it over. Her fingers were cold and delicate as question marks. "Miss Dale," I said, pocketing the exhibit, "where were you between midnight and 2? "In bed," she said. "Alone. You can check with the clock. It never lies." "I'll add it to my suspect list," I said. "You're climbing fast." She rose suddenly. "Do you think I killed him?" "I think," I said, "you're the only one who had a key to the crime scene and a motive printed in hardback." She stepped close enough for the scent of her perfume to compete with the smoke. "Mr. Goodwin, if I were guilty, would I have let you in?" "I've met guilt that served coffee," I said. Her lips trembled into something almost like a smile. "You're cruel." "I'm thorough," I said. "You'll thank me if Wolfe clears you." "Will he?" "That depends what grows from that glove." She turned away, shoulders quivering. "You'll call me?" "Only if it's good news. Wolfe doesn't believe in breaking hearts before supper." I left her sitting at the desk, the typewriter still ticking softly like an alibi that couldn't stop confessing. Back at the brownstone, it was 11:10. Wolfe was in the office, robe and all, sipping beer like a pope blessing the barley. He looked up when I came in. "You have been out too long," he said. "Explain." I gave him the rundown, Panzer's trace, Lorna's confession about the key, her tears and the glove. When I finished, he extended a hand, palm up. The glove. I produced it. He lifted it delicately, his nostrils flaring like a sommelier inspecting a rare vintage. "Lilac pollen," he said. "Distinctive and unique. Theodore's hybrid from the East Bed. No florist carries this strain, only this house does." "You're sure?" I am never unsure of my own progeny, he said. No florist carries this strain. It left here before Theodore discovered the theft. Ergo, someone entered the plant rooms earlier and carried the trace out. I frowned. That's impossible. Fritz doesn't open those doors. Theodore locks them at 6 sharp. Nevertheless, Wolfe dropped the glove into an evidence envelope. Someone trespassed, and not for horticulture. She said it brushed off flowers in the lobby. Phooey. He poured himself more beer. No florist in Manhattan carries this strain. The pigment is peculiar to my soil mixture. Miss Dale has been here. That's a neat trick, I said, considering she hasn't been invited since you banned fiction writers after that magazine interview. His eyes flicked toward me. Do not jest. Theft is possible. Entry conceivable. But for what purpose? To obtain pollen for misdirection? To plant evidence? Or maybe just curiosity, I said. She used to write about private eyes. Maybe she wanted to see the original fat detective up close. His glare could have sterilized the orchid crop. Archie, your gallantry will abridge this case into folly. The woman is dangerous. She looked more broken than dangerous. That too is a weapon. He set his glass down with a thud. I will not have my orchids contaminated by sentimental effusion. Understood, I said. What do we do next? You will revisit her, tomorrow, discover how she obtained the key and whether she still possesses other tokens. Of affection? Of guilt, he said. Now leave me. The orchids require inspection and you require rest. I have no wish to explain to Inspector Kramer why my assistant succumbed to pneumonia for the sake of a siren. Touching, I said. You do care. I care, he said, about efficiency. Fritz appeared at the doorway, silent as ritual, bearing the tray and 2 chilled glasses. Wolfe accepted one without looking up. I took the other. He lifted his in salute, eyes still on the glove. To trespass, he said, and to those foolish enough to commit it. I clinked his glass. And to women who keep spare keys. He grunted, which for Wolfe meant agreement, and I left him to his orchids, the only ladies he trusted. When I opened the door to my apartment that night, I half expected silence, maybe a leftover echo from breakfast. What I got instead was chaos with a decorator's touch. Drawers gutted, papers flung, cushions gutted like bad metaphors. My lamp was on its side, the shade crumpled, and the place smelled faintly of cordite and cheap cologne. Somebody had gone through my life with a shovel. I stood in the doorway a minute, letting the scene introduce itself. There's a certain etiquette to a break-in. The intruder always leaves a calling card, sometimes a fingerprint, sometimes a bad habit. I spotted the first clue right away, my gun case open and empty. My .38 was gone, and that did more to raise my pulse than any corpse I'd met lately. If this keeps up, I muttered, stepping over a pile of shirts, I'll start charging rent for corpses and burglars alike. The papers on my desk were ruffled but mostly intact. Old notes from other cases, the kind Wolfe pretends not to read but remembers in footnotes. My typewriter was untouched, maybe out of professional respect. But the bottom drawer where I'd kept a photostat of the orchid kiss, cleaned out. I bent to pick up what looked like a scrap of metal near the radiator. It was a cufflink, half of a pair, gold-plated and bent at the stem. Engraved initials caught the light. H.S. Howard Sloane, the anxious publisher who'd been sweating through his collar at Vance's memorial. That made it official. My place had become a branch office for homicide. The phone still worked. I dialed the brownstone. Fritz answered, soft as always. Goodwin residence. It's me, I said. You can tell Wolfe that burglars appreciate good fiction. My apartment just got the deluxe search treatment. They left a mess and took my gun. One moment. Then came the familiar rumble, low and sharp as thunder in a marble canyon. Archie, what nonsense is this? No nonsense. Somebody turned my place inside out looking for that manuscript fragment. Either they found it or they got bored. My .38's missing, which I doubt is coincidence. He inhaled audibly. Phooey, you are unharmed. Still symmetrical, yes. Stay there. I will... He stopped himself. Wolfe never leaves the brownstone. Not even burglars merit the exception. No, you will return here immediately. Bring nothing that might be contaminated. Fritz will secure the doors. You will sleep here tonight. Feeling paternal, are we? I'm feeling prudent, he snapped. We are being invaded. My orchids, my home, and now you. I do not indulge in coincidence. Return. Yes, sir, I said. Shall I bring the evidence? What evidence? Broken cufflink. HS looks like Sloane's monogram. There was a pause long enough to grow ivy on the line. Bring it, he said finally. Handle it with a handkerchief. And Archie, no heroics. The man who breaks into your apartment once may return to finish an omission. Touching, I said. I'll stop for coffee so I'm alert when he does. He hung up without the customary farewell. That's affection, Wolfe style. I packed the cufflink carefully in a paper envelope, took one last look around the wreckage and locked up. The hallway smelled of varnish and bad conscience. Whoever had done it knew where to look and what for. By the time I reached the brownstone, the night had settled into that rare Manhattan quiet that only happens when the city's too tired to sin. Fritz opened the door himself, unusual enough to qualify as a national emergency. He looked at me the way a priest looks at a man tracking mud into the confessional. Mr. Wolfe is waiting, he said. You are not to go out again tonight. I handed him my coat and went to the office. Wolfe was there in his robe, a volume of Horace closed beside him, his beer untouched. The sight of the glass alone told me this was serious. He gestured to the envelope in my hand. The cufflink. I set it on the desk. Found near the radiator. You can read the engraving without bifocals. He examined it under the desk lamp, frowning. Howard Sloane, he said softly. The man radiated anxiety. Now he radiates stupidity. Maybe he came by to borrow sugar. Do not trifle. The man had motive. Financial, personal, professional. Vance's death jeopardized his business. If he believed the manuscript implicated him, he'd go digging for it, I finished, and help himself to my gun while he was at it. That's convenient. Too convenient, Wolfe said. If he planted this to mislead us, it was a clumsy gesture. If not, he pressed his lips together. We shall see. Fritz. The door opened at once. Yes, sir. Secure the house, all doors and windows. No one enters or leaves. Mr. Goodwin will occupy the guest room upstairs tonight. Fritz's brows climbed. The guest room, sir? Yes. I will not have him murdered in his sleep under my roof. If he is to be murdered, it must be elsewhere. Comforting, I said. Fritz inclined his head gravely. I shall lock the doors, sir. When he left, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. Archie, describe the scene again. The order, the disposition, every detail. Omit nothing. So I did, pacing the room while he listened. Drawers, papers, the missing gun, the smell of cordite, even the odd scrape on the floor near the window latch. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose like a deflating dirigible. Whoever searched knew you had the fragment, he said, or believed it. That narrows our field to those aware of its existence. Kramer, myself, Miss Kenton, Miss Dale, and the murderer. Of those, only one would stoop to ransacking an apartment. The murderer. I'll buy that, I said. But which one is it? That, Wolfe said, is what you are alive to find out. He opened his eyes then, and for once there wasn't just irritation in them. There was something that looked suspiciously like concern. I do not wish you to be shot with your own weapon, Archie. It would be both untidy and humiliating. I'll try to die more creatively if it comes to that, he grunted. Pfui, go upstairs. The bed is aired. I shall inform Theodore to watch the greenhouse. Whoever enters once may enter again. Check the orchids for fingerprints while you're at it. Do not mock, he said. Those flowers are more sensitive than you. Sure, they wilt when I don't water them. He half smiled then, the kind that happens once per administration. You will stay here until morning. If Kramer calls, I will deal with him. If he arrives, Fritz will deny you exist. Music to my ears, I said. Anything else? Yes. Lock your door. And Archie, yes, sir. He hesitated. I am pleased you are not harmed. Well, I said, if you ever want to put that in writing, I'll frame it. He reached for his beer. Get out before I regret saying it. I went upstairs. Fritz met me on the landing with a lantern and the look of a Swiss sentry about to defend the Alps. All locked, he said, and I've checked the cellar. Good, I said. If anyone gets in tonight, they'll deserve what they find. The guest room smelled of linen and lemon polish. I set my wallet on the nightstand, the cufflink still in the envelope on Wolfe's desk downstairs. From the hallway came the faint click of bolts sliding into place and Fritz's soft tread retreating. I lay down but didn't bother to undress. Wolfe's brownstone might have been the safest house in Manhattan, but that night it felt like a fortress surrounded by shadows. Somewhere out there, somebody had my gun and thought they could shoot their way to the orchid kiss. They were welcome to try. When Inspector Kramer wants to see you before lunch, it's either a compliment or a subpoena. The bell rang at 10:30 sharp, cutting through the peaceful rustle of Wolfe's morning mail like a gunshot. Fritz appeared at the doorway of the office, pale and precise as always. "Inspector Kramer, sir," he said, as though announcing an eclipse. Wolfe groaned. "Archie, disarm him of his cigar before he crosses my threshold." "I'd have to draw a weapon first," I said, and given recent trends, I'd rather not. Kramer came in like a thundercloud in a tweed coat. He didn't light the cigar, but he chewed on it with professional bitterness. His hat was still in his hand, a gesture of civility that usually preceded bad news. He looked at me first, then at Wolfe, then at the desk piled high with correspondence that had probably never been answered. "I didn't come to bark," he said. "I came because I need a word with both of you." Wolfe, who was still behind his desk in his brown silk robe, adjusted his position with the weary grace of a monarch tolerating diplomacy. "Then use it, Inspector. Words are your métier." Kramer set his hat down, took a breath, and dropped the bomb. "The bullet that killed Leland Vance came from your revolver, Goodwin." I'll give myself credit. I didn't blink. I just leaned back and said, "I'd have thanked you for the compliment if it hadn't come with handcuffs." Kramer grunted. "Don't get cute. Ballistics match the rifling grooves exactly. Same caliber, same twist, same everything. We traced the serial number too. You reported that piece stolen last night." "Right," I said, along with my dignity and a drawful of socks. "You think I'm laughing?" His tone was short of anger, but it had the fatigue of a man who'd rather be wrong. Wolfe's hand froze mid-air over the morning paper. When he finally spoke, his voice could have flash-frozen lava. "Then your quarry is my companion?" "I didn't say that," Kramer answered quickly, "but the DA will. I came here before they start making noise. If you've got anything that can prove where that gun went, now's the time." Wolfe leaned forward, his gaze drilling straight through Kramer's jacket and out the back wall. "You dare to suggest that Mr. Goodwin, my agent, my associate, committed murder with a firearm stolen from his own apartment? That he conveniently misplaced it before killing a man outside his own door?" Kramer's jaw tightened. "I'm suggesting somebody's making it look that way, and I need help proving it isn't him." That silenced Wolfe for 3 full seconds. Then he leaned back, exhaled, and said quietly, "You surprise me, Inspector." "Don't make a habit of it," Kramer muttered. He finally parked the cigar in an ashtray. "Ballistics found traces of lilac pollen on the gun barrel. We thought maybe it came from one of Vance's plants, but the lab boys say it's an odd strain. You grow orchids, Wolfe. Any of them smell like lilac?" The pause that followed could have been bottled and sold as tension. Wolfe's eyelids sank halfway. "Yes," he said finally. "One. A hybrid of my own creation. You saw it once during an ill-timed visit, I believe." Kramer nodded grimly. "Then you see why I'm here. Whoever stole Goodwin's gun may have also stolen your flowers." Archie Goodwin, accused accessory to botany and murder. That was new. "I will need," Wolfe said slowly, "your laboratory report, your ballistic chart, and a complete list of all personnel who had access to the evidence." Kramer blinked. "That's not regulation." "Neither is intelligence, but you manage," Wolfe replied dryly. "You have come not to threaten, but to solicit assistance. I offer it, under my conditions. You will give me 48 hours. In that time, I will either deliver your murderer or evidence irrefutable of Mr. Goodwin's innocence." "And if you don't?" "Then you may bring your warrant," Wolfe said, "but you will find him still here, because I will not permit him to step beyond these walls until the matter is resolved." That got me a glare from both men. "Wait a minute," I said. "What am I, a potted fern?" "Be silent," Wolfe commanded. He turned back to Kramer. 48 hours. That is my bargain. You may call it a professional courtesy or desperation as you please." Kramer rubbed his forehead, groaned, and finally nodded. "Fine. 48 hours. I'll have the lab results couriered over in an hour." He grabbed his hat, jammed it on his head, and shot me a look. "Goodwin, don't make me regret this. If the DA breathes down my neck, I'll need more than your boss's vocabulary to save your hide." "I'll send you flowers," I said. Lilac orchids, maybe." He barked a laugh despite himself and left without another word. When the front door closed, Wolfe reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared almost instantly, as if he'd been eavesdropping, which, knowing Fritz, he probably had. "Beer," Wolfe said curtly, "and a sandwich. Mr. Goodwin will require sustenance while I determine whether to strangle him." "Coming, sir," Fritz said, disappearing. Wolfe turned to me, his eyes like molten brass. "Phooey, this is intolerable." "Tell me about it," I said. "It's not every day I get promoted from suspect to cause célèbre." He jabbed a finger toward me. "You will not so much as sneeze without my sanction. No wandering, no phone calls, no impulsive gallivanting. You are confined here until I exonerate you." He relented enough to grant me one supervised excursion that evening, Saul shadowing me door to door and Kramer pre-notified, on the condition I returned straight after. "House arrest," I said. "I should have taken a bigger apartment." "This is no jest, Archie." He leaned forward, voice lowering. "If Kramer had arrived with a warrant, you would now be in custody. I will not have that indignity repeated." Something in his tone shut me up faster than a subpoena. Wolfe doesn't often sound human, but when he does, it's disarming. After a moment, I said quietly, "Thanks." He frowned. "Do not thank me. I am merely protecting my investment. You are irreplaceable, if only because training another assistant would be insufferable." I grinned. "That's almost tender." "Phooey." He reached for his beer as Fritz entered with the tray. "You will remain upstairs tonight again. I will telephone Saul Panzer immediately. He is to investigate Sloane's movements. And Theodore will check the locks to the plant rooms. Someone has been tampering with my property as well as my peace." I poured myself coffee from the side table. "Any chance the same guy who ransacked my place and stole my gun also swiped your pollen sample?" "An elementary deduction, yes," Wolfe said, "but with troubling implications. Whoever framed you knows too much about this house, and me. That narrows the field." "To how many?" "Too few for comfort." He closed his eyes briefly, thinking, then said, "Archie, type a memorandum. Title it Pollen and Ballistics. Summarize today's exchange, the inspector's report, and every observable inconsistency. When complete, deliver a copy to me and one to the safe." "Yes, sir," I said, moving to my typewriter. The rhythmic clack of keys filled the office while he sipped his beer in silence. When I finished, he reread the page and nodded once, a slow, regal motion. "Good. We will start there. 48 hours. I couldn't resist. "That's practically a vacation." "Only if you enjoy confinement," he said. He signalled Fritz, who cleared the tray. The heavy air of the room lightened just a fraction, and Wolfe finally leaned back, eyes closed, as if surrendering to thought. I sat there watching him, the immovable mountain plotting salvation for one of its own foothills, and thought, not for the first time, that loyalty came in strange packaging. Then I said, mostly to break the silence, "If you do clear me in 48 hours, can I get hazard pay?" He didn't open his eyes. "No." And that, for Wolfe, was reassurance enough. With Saul riding herd 2 steps back, I took the elevator to Julia Kenton's floor. If guilt had a scent, Julia Kenton's penthouse could have stocked it wholesale. The air was heavy with cigarette haze, perfume, and money burning at a low, guilty temperature. She opened the door herself this time, draped in a silk robe the colour of early dusk, and wearing a bruise half hidden under a pearl clasp near her collarbone. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, her voice cool enough to mist glass, "you're becoming a subscription." "I'm flattered," I said, stepping in. "Most of my visits don't come with drapery and floor-to-ceiling regrets." She closed the door slowly, as though shutting out the city took effort. "If you've come to accuse me again, save it. I'm tired of confessions that don't belong to me." "I'll take any that pay dividends," I said. "But I did notice the bruise. That a publishing hazard, or part of your new editorial policy?" Her hand flew to the spot, too quick to be casual. "It's nothing. I slipped." "Sure," I said. "On someone's patience, maybe." The look she gave me could have frozen a brass rail. Then she sighed and crossed to the bar. "You want a drink?" "Only if it's non-lethal." She poured herself one instead, something amber and practiced, and perched on the arm of a chair. The sunlight fought its way through the drapes in slow stripes. "All right, Mr. Goodwin," she said. "You win. Vance was blackmailing me. I paid him once. It wasn't enough." I kept my face still. "For what?" For silence, she said. About the orchid kiss. That manuscript keeps getting more popular than the Bible, I said. Whose sins was he selling this time? Not mine, she said sharply. Lorna Dale wrote it. It was a parody, a cruel one. She satirized half the city's publishing world, including Howard Sloane. He was her lover then. I let that sink in. And when she dumped him, she wrote him into a novel as the villain. As a fraud, Julia said, staring into her glass. She called him the man who bound lies in linen. Vance saw an opportunity. He wanted to publish it to destroy Sloane, and me, by association. I'd rejected it at Eclipse, but he had the carbon copy. Nice racket, I said. You pay to keep it quiet, Sloane sweats, and Vance laughs all the way to the morgue. Exactly, she said softly. Only I didn't put him there. I believed her about halfway, the top half. Miss Kenton, I said, you're an editor. Words are your trade. You ought to know when you've said too much. Her eyes flashed. And you ought to know when a woman's trying to save her reputation. You think I care about money? It was my name, my house. He was threatening to ruin. Reputation is the only currency that spends in this business. She stood and went to her desk, a sleek glass expanse with papers neatly suicidal in piles. From one drawer she took a folded yellow telegram and handed it to me. You'll want to see this before you go galloping off to tell Wolfe I'm lying. The telegram was brief, angry, and timed at 7:45 p.m. the night Vance died. From Howard Sloane, Midtown Hotel, to Julia Kenton, Eclipse Books. Enough of your secrets. If Vance prints that filth, I expose everything. You'll both be finished. H.S. It was the kind of message that could make a grand jury sit up and take notes. I refolded it carefully. Did the police see this? I burned the first copy, she said. That one's a duplicate. I kept it for insurance. Against who? Everyone, she said. She went to the window, pulled the drapes wider, and let in a blade of sunlight. Her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost still editing its obituary. I loved Sloane once. I even thought I could fix him. But love isn't an editorial process. Maybe not, I said. But murder is final proof. She turned sharply. I told you, I didn't kill Vance, and neither did Howard. Then who did? I don't know, she said. Maybe Lorna. Maybe someone Vance tried to squeeze. He had a ledger full of favours owed and reputations mortgaged. If you think I'm guilty because I bruise easily, you're more naive than I thought. I'm a lot of things, I said. Naive doesn't make the list. I took another look around. The place was too neat for honesty. Even her cigarette smoke rose in perfect spirals, like it knew the choreography. I spotted an ashtray full of lipstick-stained butts, half a nervous night's worth. She'd been up thinking about something that didn't print well. The phone on her desk rang. She glanced at it, then at me. Would you mind? Not unless it's for me. She answered, murmured something low, and hung up. Sloane, she said flatly. He wants to meet. He says he has something that will clear me. That's promising, I said, or suicidal. She gave a humorless laugh. You think I should go? I think you should let Wolfe decide. He likes to play God between meals. Meals, she said. Does he ever leave that house? Only in fiction, I said. That earned the faintest smile, which for Julia Kenton was the emotional equivalent of a fanfare. I picked up the telegram again, slipping it into my pocket. This stays on loan, I said. Wolfe will want to see it. It might keep me from being shot at again. Will you call him now? She asked. I always report into the head office, I said, heading for the phone. She sank into her chair, one leg crossed high, exhaling smoke like punctuation. I dialed the brownstone. Fritz's calm voice answered, then transferred me upstairs. Wolfe, came the voice, clipped as a paper knife. It's Archie. I've just paid another visit to Julia Kenton. She swapped her mink for moral injury and produced a telegram from Sloane. It's dated the night of the murder. Threatens exposure if Vance printed the orchid kiss. Indeed, Wolfe said. Then Sloane's temper furnishes motive, but not precision. What else? Vance was blackmailing her to suppress Lorna Dale's satire. Apparently Lorna wrote it to lampoon her ex-lover. Sloane again. It's a triangle, sir, with one corner missing a heartbeat. Pfui, I expected as much. She's bruised up, claims she slipped, he snorted. You enjoy these interviews excessively, Archie. Just fulfilling your education, sir, I said. Some of us still do field work. Was she sincere? She could have cried for the camera and still looked editorial, I said. But she's scared. That part's genuine. Good. Bring the telegram directly. And Archie, avoid gallantry. You are not a matador. Yes, sir. Anything else? Yes. Lunch at 1. Do not be late. He hung up. By 1, we ate and argued like civilized men. By 6, the city had traded its tie for neon, and Wolfe's 48 hours were already spending themselves. Julia was watching me from behind her cigarette smoke. Does he approve? He disapproves of nearly everything. That's what makes him so reliable. I pocketed my notebook and tipped my hat. If Sloane calls again, don't answer. We'll handle him our way. She rose and followed me to the door. Mr. Goodwin, she said quietly, for a man who asks too many questions, you're very kind. Don't spread that around, I said. It'd ruin my reputation. In the hallway, I took one last breath of her perfume, the kind of scent that made truth seem negotiable. In publishing, truth takes longer to print and costs more, especially when your source orders the filet mignon and expects you to pick up the check. Wolfe signed off on a single stop, Sloane, Saul keeping tally from the bar. Discreet as ever, Saul logged faces and times. I handled the talking. The restaurant was one of those midtown joints with mirrors on every wall, so the patrons could watch themselves being sophisticated. The air had that blend of butter, smoke, and pretense that comes free with the linen. Howard Sloane was already at the table, nursing a martini and an expression that said he hadn't slept since Vance took his last breath. Mr. Goodwin, he greeted me, voice smooth as printer's ink. You're punctual. Wolfe trained you well. Somebody had to, I said, taking a seat. He sends his regards, by the way, in the same tone he uses for tax notices. That earned a wan smile. He gestured for a waiter and ordered another martini before I'd unfolded my napkin. I assume this is about Leland Vance. I've already told Inspector Kramer everything. I know. You were dining here with Bernard Paxton, 8 to 10, surrounded by enough witnesses to fill a jury box. He nodded. You can confirm it yourself. The maitre d', 2 editors from Literary Forum, and Miss Anstruther from the Gazette were all present. I leaned back. That's airtight, if you don't count the drafts. You didn't leave the table at all? He hesitated, just a flicker, then smiled too quickly. I stepped away for a phone call. 20 minutes at most. A business matter. Sure, I said. Probably checking tomorrow's horoscope. He stiffened, then softened again. I see sarcasm is part of your method. Only when it saves time, I said. What kind of business call at 9:30 on a Friday night? Personal business, he said smoothly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm meeting my lawyer. He rose before dessert. I didn't try to stop him. Sometimes the best way to catch a liar is to let him finish the sentence. Paxton showed up just as Sloane disappeared through the revolving door. The critic looked like he'd been poured into his tweed suit and wrung out halfway. His eyes darted like quotation marks around the room until they landed on me. Goodwin, he muttered. You've got nerve showing here after the circus you've caused. Call it professional enthusiasm, I said. Care for coffee? He slumped into the chair Sloane had vacated. I've had enough stimulants to float a battleship. What do you want? Your statement to Kramer says you dined with Sloane until 10. That's correct. Start to finish? He hesitated, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He was with me most of the time. Define most. 20 minutes, he said finally. He excused himself for a call, claimed it was his broker, but I saw his face when he came back. He wasn't thinking about the market. Did he mention Vance? No, but he didn't need to. Everyone in publishing knew Vance was playing with fire. I told Sloane that night the man would get himself killed. Prophetic, I said. He gave a tired shrug. And look at me, still unpaid. I paid the check and left him glaring into his coffee. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was exactly where I'd left him, behind the desk, hands steepled, eyes half shut like a cat pretending to nap. The smell of Fritz's dinner prep drifted faintly through the hall. Garlic, onions, and justice waiting to be served. You have a report, he said, without opening his eyes. I do. Sloane and Paxton dined together, 8 to 10. Sloane ducked out for 20 minutes around 9:30, allegedly to make a phone call. Paxton says he looked rattled afterward. Wolfe's lids lifted. And where was Vance at 9:30? According to Kramer's timeline, dead in my hallway around 10. Wolfe's fingers tapped once on the desk blotter. Precisely. The 20-minute absence coincides with the fatal rendezvous. Meaning Sloane made the call to lure Vance to my building. He nodded. To an apartment you occupy, ensuring confusion and police inconvenience. Charming, I said. If I ever write my memoirs, that'll make the foreword. He ignored me. What of Paxton's demeanour? Shaky. Feels guilty about something, but not murder. More like guilt for knowing he's in the wrong publishing circle. Perhaps, Wolfe said. But his admission provides the crack we require. An alibi dependent on corroboration is no alibi at all. Kramer won't buy that without proof. Wolfe's eyes glinted. Inspector Kramer will buy what he must. You will, of course, withhold speculation when next he calls. Sure, I said. I'll practice my innocent face. He leaned back, fingers drumming once more. Archie, your inadvertent efficiency continues to surprise me. Thanks, I said, though I'm not sure whether to frame that or have it autographed. He reached for the bell cord and gave it a gentle tug. Fritz, he called when the door opened. Beer for Mr. Goodwin. He has earned it. Yes, sir, Fritz said, smiling slightly, and vanished again. I grinned. That's twice in one day you've been complimentary, boss. People will talk. Let them, Wolfe said. I am regrettably dependent upon you for legwork. It would be inefficient to have you shot. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, I said. He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up the fragment of the orchid kiss from his desk and turned it over thoughtfully. A phone call, a missing flower, and a corpse in your hallway. The pattern is not complete, but the rhythm is clear. Tomorrow, we press the next note. Fritz reappeared with a chilled glass. I took it, saluted Wolfe, and leaned against the doorframe. Here's to publishing, I said, where everybody's got a story, and most of them are fiction. He grunted. Spare me your epigrams, Archie. Drink your beer. At 1 o'clock sharp, lunch. Headed for the elevator. Manhattan waited below, full of headlines that hadn't been written yet. I pressed the telegram flat in my pocket. Somewhere between the bruises and the blackmail, the story was starting to make sense, and I had the uneasy feeling that when it did, it wouldn't smell half as sweet. You can tell when trouble's invaded Wolfe's personal kingdom, because the house gets quieter than a monastery with stage fright. That morning, the silence had a pulse. The next morning, at 9 sharp, I climbed the stairs to the plant rooms. The smell hit first, that hot, damp mix of chlorophyll and obsession. Theodore Horstman was hunched over a work table, his sleeves rolled up and his face wearing the expression of a man who'd found sin in paradise. Goodwin, he said, barely above a whisper. One of the hybrids. She's gone. The way he said she would have made a widow jealous. I strolled closer. You don't mean ran away, I hope. Fritz's dumplings have been known to cause flights of fancy, but not among orchids. He shot me a look that could curdle sap. This is no joke. The new Odontoglossum lilacinum var. Wolfei. Gone from its pot. Cut clean. The name hit me like a cue. Lilacinum? That's the one you said left pollen on Lorna Dale's glove. He nodded, grim as a tax notice. Only one plant in existence. Mr. Wolfe bred it himself. Right on cue, the door opened and Wolfe entered, wearing his house jacket of mustard silk, his expression 10 degrees colder than the greenhouse. The humidity seemed to bow to him. Theodore informs me, he said, that larceny has been committed in Eden. Explain. Theodore stammered through his discovery. The missing plant, the empty space on the rack, the suspiciously neat cut. Wolfe listened without blinking, then turned his head an inch toward me. Archie. Yes, sir. Inspect the rear windows. I made a slow circuit, more to delay the inevitable shouting than for forensic brilliance. The frames gleamed under violet grow lamps. On the far window my eyes caught something, faint scratches on the brass latch, bright against the older patina. I leaned in. Looks like somebody's been fiddling with this recently, I said. Maybe using a blade or screwdriver. Wolfe came closer, his bulk stirring the humid air like a ship through mist. Describe. Fine gouges, fresh metal glint. From outside in, judging by the burr. Theodore inhaled sharply. But the outer sill is 12 feet up from the ground. Which narrows our suspect pool, I said. Anyone who knows the back layout or isn't afraid of climbing for floral glory. Wolfe's eyes shut halfway. That meant the machinery upstairs was whirring. Pfui, he murmured. An intrusion of this intimacy implies acquaintance, not mere burglary. Someone entered knowing precisely what they sought. Maybe they were just decorating, I said. People will steal anything that blooms these days. Wolfe ignored that. He bent, remarkably, to inspect the sill himself, a rare sight worth framing. The motive is not beauty, it is misdirection. The theft seeks to obfuscate the association between the pollen on Miss Dale's glove and this house. So the thief steals the plant that could tie us to her. Smart. Not smart enough, he said. The presence of pollen was already observed, recorded, and transmitted to Inspector Kramer. Its absence now only heightens suspicion. Then we're framed in orchids instead of fingerprints, I said. Classy. He straightened, slowly, like an old general from a lost war, and fixed Theodore with a gaze sharp enough to prune vines. You are certain the entry was nocturnal? Yes, sir. I checked the rooms at 6 yesterday evening. This morning, his voice caught. Gone. Wolfe's tone softened by a hair. You are not culpable, Theodore. A man may tend flowers, not fence them. Theodore's mouth set like a clamp. He retreated to the benches, Latin under his breath and the shears working with surgical restraint. I watched him go, then said, So, what's the working theory? Somebody breaks in, steals your pride and pollen, and leaves no note of thanks. A publishing war turned to horticultural sabotage. Wolfe grunted, a short, disdainful breath. It is a violation of two sanctities, Archie, of domicile and of art, both intolerable. He moved toward his chair, the special stool planted between the benches. Retrieve the latch sample. I will want photographic record and a dusting for prints. Kramer's going to love that, I said. The great Nero Wolfe preserving evidence. Next thing, he'll deputize you. He lifted an eyebrow. I would rather join a minstrel troupe. I took out my notepad, sketching the window layout while he sat in thought. The grow lights hummed overhead like a warning. Sir, I said after a minute, this back window opens into the alley behind the brownstone, right? Narrow enough for one man to climb with a ladder? Yes. And locked every night? By you, he said pointedly. Touché, I admitted. So either our thief had tools and nerve, or a key and opportunity. He turned his head toward me. You refer to Miss Dale's glove. I do, I said. She had the pollen before the theft, which means whoever took the orchid later wanted to make it look like she, or someone close, brought it here. Neat reversal. For a long moment, Wolfe didn't speak. The faint hum of the greenhouse fans filled the pause. Then, surprisingly, he said, Archie, that is admirable. I blinked. Pardon? He inclined his head. Your observation regarding the latch. Precise and timely. Well, sir, I'll have Fritz etch it on my tombstone. Here lies Archie Goodwin, once admired for noticing hardware. He gave a short, amused rumble that might have been a chuckle in another century. Do not grow insufferable. I retract nothing but enthusiasm. I grinned. Too late. It's already entered the record. Wolfe pressed the bell cord. Moments later, Fritz appeared in the doorway, immaculate as always. Yes, Mr. Wolfe. Seal the rear doors and windows, Wolfe instructed. For tonight we are besieged. No admittance save by summons. Yes, sir. Fritz disappeared as silently as he came. Wolfe looked at me. Archie, note this. The theft changes nothing. It only reveals our adversary's desperation. Whoever pilfered that orchid will soon regret its scent. Sure, I said. And until then? Until then, he said, rising, we dine. Beauty, like deceit, should never be examined on an empty stomach. I followed him out, casting one last look at the vacant pot on the shelf, a small, clean hole in paradise where something precious had bloomed. Somebody stole an orchid, I muttered. Next thing they'll be counterfeiting Fritz's omelettes. Wolfe didn't turn, but I swear I saw his shoulders twitch, the closest he'd ever come to laughter. I raised the glass. Yes, sir, I'll toast to that too. And for a brief, golden moment, with the office glowing under the desk lamp and the scent of orchids drifting faintly from upstairs, the world seemed almost civilized, until the next call came. If the pen's mightier than the sword, somebody just proved it with a 38. The 48 hours Kramer gave us were burning down when the phone cut through Fritz's quiet like a scalpel. The news came in at 8:30, while Wolfe was lifting his first beer of the evening like a priest with a chalice. Fritz had just cleared the plates when the phone rang. I picked it up, thinking it'd be Kramer calling to chew on our last report. Instead, it was Saul Panzer's steady voice, trimmed of all extra syllables. "Paxton's dead," he said. "Shot in his office. They're calling it suicide." I repeated it, and Wolfe froze mid-sip. For a man who could outstare statues, that moment had movement. He set the glass down precisely. "Explain," he said. Gun in his hand, Saul continued, desk lamp burning, note on the blotter. "I can't live with the truth. Kramer's men are there. I thought you'd want me on it." "Indeed," Wolfe said, his voice deep and taut. "Remain. Examine without interference. Report what is fact, not supposition." Saul hung up. The silence afterward had weight. Wolfe finally exhaled. "Archie, record this. Bernard Paxton, dead. An honest mind extinguished because deceit is cowardly and murder is facile." "Should I type that for posterity?" I said. He ignored it. "You will telephone Inspector Kramer in 1 hour. By then, I expect facts." At 9:30, the call came. Saul's report was clean as ever. Powder burns on Paxton's left hand, though every photograph on his desk showed him writing and lifting glasses with the right. The angle of the wound, too neat. No struggle, no hesitation. A showpiece suicide. I relayed it all. Wolfe listened, then leaned back, eyes closed. "Phooey," he said quietly. "A thinking man silenced by a fool." When the bell rang at 10, Fritz opened the door for Kramer. The inspector came in like he'd been walking uphill through ash. His coat was unbuttoned, tie askew, cigar unlit between his teeth. "Well," he said. Wolfe gestured to the red chair. "You have news." Kramer dropped into it with a sigh that could have flattened Fritz's soufflé. "Paxton's dead. Suicide, according to the ME's preliminary. But it doesn't fit. Gunpowder residue on the left hand. He was right-handed." "Then it is not suicide," Wolfe said. "Do not insult your own discernment." Kramer rubbed his forehead. "You're enjoying this." "Enjoyment is a vulgar word," Wolfe replied. "I am incensed. Your quarry, our quarry, has struck again, and with impunity." Kramer looked up, eyes bloodshot but steady. "You think Sloane?" "I think nothing," Wolfe said. "I deduce that Paxton, in confessing the truth of Sloane's 20-minute absence, sealed his fate. The man who profits most from silence arranged it." Kramer grunted. "That's a theory. I need proof." "You will have it," Wolfe said. "The manner of death tells more than the corpse itself. Left-hand powder, right-hand man. Someone stood close enough to stage decency. That narrows it." Kramer snorted. "You talk like the body's an editorial." "In a sense," Wolfe said softly. "A manuscript revised by a coward." For a moment, neither spoke. The clock ticked in the corner, marking time the way truth marks guilt. Then Kramer got up, slower than usual. "It stinks," he said finally. "You're right, Wolfe, it stinks all over." He shoved the dead cigar into his pocket and started for the door. Wolfe's voice stopped him. "Inspector, take care. The man who writes one death seldom stops at a single draft." Kramer turned, gave a grim nod, and left. I shut the door and looked at Wolfe. That was almost friendly. Wolfe's gaze didn't move. "I detest waste, Archie. And tonight, intellect was murdered." He reached for his beer again, but his hand paused before the glass. "Fritz," he called, voice low. "Another. And make it cold." I watched him drink in silence. There was no satisfaction in being right. Not this time. In this business, fiction pays better than truth. And sometimes, the best fiction is bait. At Wolfe's instruction, I'd spent the morning dictating a small bomb for the Gazette's literary page. Lost manuscript of The Orchid Kiss recovered. Authenticity pending confirmation. By dusk, the air over West 35th was thick enough to cut with a butter knife. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared a moment later, eyebrows lifted in quiet drama. "Miss Julia Kenton," he said. She entered like a shadow in perfume, pale, shaking, every inch of her screaming money in distress. Her gloves trembled in her hand, but her voice came clipped. Mr. Wolfe, I came to—" He lifted a finger. "To purchase silence." Her breath caught. "Then you do have it." Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded. "The manuscript of the Orchid Kiss. Indeed, the Gazette claims so. But truth, madam, does not always require ink." I took her coat. "You'll forgive the lack of ceremony. We skipped the red carpet for extortion night." She shot me a look that could peel varnish. "I don't find this amusing." "Few do," I said. She faced Wolfe again. "Vance had the only copy. If it's surfaced, if you have it, I'll pay. I can't afford scandal." "How tedious," Wolfe murmured. "Money again. Sit, Miss Kenton. You are overwrought." She sat, clutching her purse as if it held her pulse. Wolfe folded his hands. "Tell me, did Mr. Vance ever show you the full manuscript?" "No," she whispered. "He read passages, said the rest was locked away. He swore he'd print it, expose us both, unless I paid." "Ah," Wolfe's voice purred. "Then you confirm it. The Orchid Kiss never existed in full." Her eyes widened. "You knew?" "I surmised," he said. "Vance dealt in illusion. A fabricated novel waved like a torch before moths of vanity. You, Miss Kenton, fluttered nearest." She covered her mouth. "Then this Gazette notice." "A trap," I said helpfully. "And congratulations. You bit beautifully." Wolfe's tone turned crisp. "You may cease trembling. You are guilty of cowardice, not homicide. Vance's killer sought leverage, not literature." Her gaze dropped. "It was Sloane," she murmured. "He said he'd end it, just frighten Vance. I never believed he'd—" Wolfe raised a palm. "Not another word. Confession is best reserved for the inspector. I merely wish to confirm what was never written." The silence afterward was as thick as the weather outside. She rose unsteadily. "What will you do with me?" "Nothing," Wolfe said. "You have already paid the price, your dignity." She hesitated, then left. The front door clicked like a final sentence. I leaned against Wolfe's desk. "You make blackmail sound like botany." He allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. "Both involve growth through decay, Archie, and pruning when necessary." Fritz appeared at the door. "Beer, sir?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "2 glasses. Mr. Goodwin has earned one." I grinned. Fiction does pay better, after all. By 9 o'clock, the brownstone was wound tighter than Fritz's egg timer. I'd polished Wolfe's globe, squared the blotter, and lined up the chairs like defendants at a firing squad. Wolfe sat enthroned behind his desk, eyes closed, fingers templed, the picture of immovable intellect waiting for the world to arrive and confess. It arrived in installments. First came Julia Kenton, all pearls and panic, pretending not to tremble. Lorna Dale followed, a storm in silk, her perfume sharp enough to cross-examine. Howard Sloane lumbered in third, his bulk upholstered in pinstripes and sweat. And last, Inspector Kramer, whose cigar looked ready to file charges on its own. Fritz closed the door and vanished. He knew a siege when he saw one. Wolfe opened his eyes, the room shifting like a stage curtain drawn back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I have summoned you not to accuse, but to clarify. Yet, inevitably, there will be accusation." Kramer grunted. "You're not the DA, Wolfe." "No," Wolfe said, "merely competent." I caught Kramer's eye and offered a neutral shrug. He rolled his cigar like a man resisting the urge to chew the furniture. Wolfe's gaze swept the room. A publisher lies dead, a critic silenced, and a manuscript non-existent. And yet, the ink is fresh on deceit. Let us print the truth. Julia shivered. "I told you I didn't kill Vance." "You did not," Wolfe agreed. "You feared exposure, not death. The author of The Orchid Kiss, Miss Dale, lampooned you through her vanity and her pen. Mr. Vance discovered the parody and saw profit in scandal. He tried to extort you both, with Mr. Sloane caught between love and ledger. As for the fragment's limping E, Miss Dale typed that page on Miss Kenton's Remington after hours. Editorial machines are communal. The key convict's the office, not the editor's hand." Sloane blustered. "That's nonsense. Vance was my partner." "Correction," Wolfe said smoothly. "Your liability. He threatened to print, you threatened to pay, and then he was found shot, with Mr. Goodwin's revolver." All eyes turned on me. I smiled pleasantly. "I'm just the guy with the bad luck and good aim." Kramer cleared his throat. The lab says the bullet came from his gun, Wolfe. That's fact. Wolfe inclined his head. Facts are petals, Inspector. One must view the flower entire. Observe. He reached into the drawer and produced a small velvet pouch. Inside lay a broken gold cufflink, the engraved initials dulled by tarnish. Sloane's colour drained to printer's paste. Where did you get that? From Mr. Goodwin's apartment, Wolfe said. Left behind during a nocturnal search for the non-existent manuscript. You wished to retrieve evidence that could never exist, but you succeeded only in implicating yourself. Lorna's voice cracked. He said he'd gone to call the lawyer that night. He did call, Wolfe said, but not the lawyer. He telephoned Vance, luring him to Mr. Goodwin's address on the pretext of payment. The meeting was fatal. Later, he staged Paxton's suicide to plug the last leak. Julia gasped, the pearls quivering like punctuation marks. Sloane surged forward. You can't prove that. Phooey. Wolfe's tone could have chilled lava. You wore that cufflink, and you trod where you should not, through my orchid rooms. The burrs on the greenhouse latch are fresh, and the unique lilac pollen from my hybrid, now missing, was already found on Miss Dale's glove. Your broken cufflink places you at Goodwin's apartment, your 20-minute absence places you at the murder, and the theft of my orchid shows your desperation to muddy the trail. You were clumsy, Mr. Sloane, and nature is a relentless witness. Kramer's eyes narrowed. That true? You're certain it's unique? Mr. Goodwin obtained the specimen, Wolfe said. The match was certain. I nodded. The scratches on the conservatory latch were fresh, too. Somebody didn't read the sign. No entry except by permission of Nero Wolfe. Wolfe's mouth curved faintly. Indeed, permission is a rare commodity here. Sloane slumped into the yellow chair, the sweat on his forehead gleaming like guilt. He was ruining us. The book, the gossip, the money. Kramer's voice softened. Save it for headquarters. He reached for his notebook, then thought better of it and signalled Stebbins, who stepped from the hallway like a well-trained hound. The cuffs clicked shut, neat as a printer's binding. Lorna turned to Wolfe. You're destroying him. I, Wolfe said. He destroyed himself. I merely edited. Julia whispered. What will happen to me? Nothing beyond self-contempt, Wolfe said curtly. It is a punishment sufficient for most. Kramer exhaled a long, weary plume of smoke. All right, Wolfe, I'll give it to you. It stinks, but it fits. Thank you, Inspector. Your candour is refreshing, if belated. Kramer managed half a grin. Next time, try letting the police solve one before lunch. Impossible, Wolfe said. I dine at 1. Kramer's chuckle rumbled as he left with Sloane in custody, Stebbins close behind. The front door closed and the brownstone resumed its preferred occupation, silence. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled again. Archie. Yes, sir? You may inform the superintendent that your apartment is again habitable. That's thoughtful. Shall I invite the burglars back for coffee, or was that a limited engagement? He gave me a look from under those mountainous brows. For once, you may have company. Of the living. I grinned. That narrows it down to about 3 women in New York who haven't tried to frame me this week. He harumphed. Your levity is ill-timed. Maybe, but it's earned. You realize, don't you, this case started with a corpse on my doormat. That makes me the first American landlord to collect rent in bullets. His lips twitched, almost a smile. You exaggerate. Sure, it's part of my charm. Fritz entered quietly with a tray, 2 chilled glasses and the beer Wolfe considered sacred. He set them down and disappeared like a stagehand who knew his cue. Wolfe raised his glass. To truth, though tardy, it arrives. I clinked mine against his. And to publication. You've just written another bestseller. He lifted a brow. Your metaphor, though vulgar, is apt. I took a swallow. The foam hit the back of my throat like victory. The city outside hummed with late traffic, indifferent and alive. I leaned against the desk, watching Wolfe settle deeper into his chair, satisfied as a sultan after judgment. You know, I said, you wouldn't leave the brownstone, but you made the world come to you, every last suspect in a neat paragraph. Wolfe closed his eyes. Precisely, Archie. That, I believe, is authorship. The clock ticked toward 11. The orchids upstairs waited for morning, the typewriter for my report. Outside, Manhattan kept printing its endless stories, most of them fiction, but not this one.